The year is 1920. The world is torn apart. Multiple countries are at war with each other. Others are rebelling themselves. And a squad of leading superpowers are now deciding the trajectory for which history will go. Because their wars have become history itself. World War I was devastating. Being known as a war to end all wars is quite misleading considering what happened after it, the interwar period. However, all is done, as the treaties were being completed. The victors, being the Allies, now had the right to punish the losers for what they brought upon them. But was it really worth it? To the Allies it was. To them, this punishment was not as severe as the deaths across the entire war. To them, their punishment was not as severe as the millions of lives who won't be able to breathe properly due to their competitors' fumes intoxicating the competition. To them, this was revenge. In the first of many treaties, the Treaty of Versailles was the most punitive treaty of them all. A halved army, the loss of overseas territories and also some mainland territories that had been theirs for hundreds of years. A revert of the treaty from decades ago, allowing the country to not only take land back, but also steal resources from them. And then, multiple reparations, and being forced to claim the responsibility of starting the war. This was the reality of the German Empire. The country had been hit so badly by these measures that the confederation that the empire was built off of collapsed. In place of the monarch government, a new republic was created. The Weimar Republic was made to make reforms to the nation and also to have a fresh new start. However, the treaty still lingered, which caused it to collapse. This is what makes a right and responsibility so powerful in the state of utter crisis. It can lead people on a path to secure their own rights, or lead them into further anguish. The Treaty of Versailles left everything on a dark trajectory nobody wanted at the time but didn't think was going to happen. Another war. In the meantime, however, more nations were rising up from the ashes of this catastrophe. The Soviet Union was established and didn't seem like a threat until later on. Poland defeated the Soviets and finally earned a right as a fully sovereign nation, which hasn't been seen in 123 years. The Russian Empire and the Romanov family executed. More and more revolutions and wars proceeded as this era of history began to unfold and calm down. The fire of the World Revolution would finally end once the Russian Civil War was brought to a close. However, that didn't stop another threat from rising up. Economic booms were happening across the world as people prepared for a new era of time, the Roaring Twenties. The United States was on an exponential growth in terms of GDP. They were already the richest country in the world, but with the utilization of electricity, the United States was now a leading producer amongst all countries in the world. Many countries needed to rely on the United States in order to have a decent economy. One of these countries was the Weimar Republic, newly formed Germany. The Weimar Republic was in full bloom. Berlin was now a fully industrial city and the third largest metropolis. If you were a German worker living in the Republic, Berlin was the place to be, as the other major cities such as Munich and Hamburg were merely towns. But Berlin was large. It had the government, multiple industries, and even the literal financial center inside of the city. Renovations inside the country also began during the Roaring Twenties. Transportation, full urbanization, and more marketable projects began during this decade. The rise of the commercial Zeppelin began. The Republic was even one of the first to not only embrace, but also promote diversity, LGBTQ, and women's rights. The Weimar Republic was in fact the dream establishment for anybody that was a German who had a dream. Until it wasn't. Remember how I said the Germans relied on the United States to have a good economy? Well, the United States stock market had finally crashed in 1929. Seeing the success of multiple companies such as oil companies, farmers, and airplane stocks, many shareholders wanted a piece of the action and eventually bought so many shares that the industries couldn't keep up, resulting in the American economy being way less valuable than what it was. So what happens when the biggest economy in the entire world collapses? Everybody else collapses. Following America's collapse, the British Empire also experienced an economic collapse. They had the second highest GDP behind the United States. So now both world leaders' economies have collapsed. Multiple countries that relied on these nations to keep their economy strolling were now in debt or just gone. This era of the world would be known as the Great Depression, as multiple companies, cities, and even nations were now in total recession. Germany was no stranger to this. Following what is now known as Black Thursday, the Weimar Republic was in total distress. Still in debt from World War I, their country is still humiliated, and now they can barely make any sort of income. The only sort of power was in the hands of the government. Even they couldn't solve this mess. In March of 1930, Heinrich Brüning became Chancellor of the fallen Weimar Republic. His goal was simple: fix the economy and decrease unemployment rates. By this point, 15.3% of Germans were unemployed. Over 4 million people couldn't even get the taste of work. Malnutrition rates skyrocketed. Without any sort of income, food was rationed, drinks were rationed, medicines were rationed. Diseases resulted from hunger, and with zero ways to combat it, the country became extremely underdeveloped. You would think that being the chancellor and getting backed by the president, that he will most certainly focus on the income and safety of these people. No, he didn't. All Brüning did was raise the taxes. Since the currency for Germany was absolutely worthless, it did nothing but cause greater harm to the people. Not only that, but the international community did nothing to help the Germans in repairing after the war, nor in the Great Depression either. The German people were alone. So now, as a result of the Brüning policies, the economic downturn, and also the incompetence of the Weimar Republic as a whole, it led to a singular man. In the trenches of war stood many soldiers, fighting for life. A young adult, once homeless and living off of dreams and realities, was now holding a gun in his hand and a shovel in the other. However, he wasn't sad about the war. He was rather ecstatic. His name was Adolf Hitler. He praised the German identity and was a strong nationalist, often cursing away his birthplace, Austria, in favor of the German people. Now he is fighting alongside them on the Western Front. However, he was infuriated upon finding out about Germany's surrender and armistice. He also saw the excessive disciplinary actions made by the treaties. His mind was already made up. It also enforced his stance on the world as a whole. His race was on top, others the bottom. And Jews, despite being a religion, he considered them a race and the lowest of the low. He got into politics in 1990 and eventually landed himself with a small German workers' party that he was only supposed to spy on for the Communist Party. However, he felt as if a blessing was sent to him, as he would join this party not knowing the future that was about to behold upon him. This, at the time, was known as the German Workers' Party. But after climbing the ranks, Hitler would take control of it and rename the Nazi Party. His rise through the ranks was quickly noticed in the German province of Bavaria, known for having multiple separatist movements, including the communist movements, which had an incredible Jewish influence. During a sentencing for a failed coup d'etat in Munich, the judges had seen Hitler as an astonishing man, and he used this to gain popularity by doing a speech about his political views and his life in the courtroom. He was sentenced to mere months for a decades-long crime. During this time, he wrote the book Mein Kampf, his autobiography, and his plans for Germany in the future. In it, he describes his plans for Germany and how he was going to reach them, plus the ways he was going to eliminate all Jews and all communists. As soon as he got out of jail, he got right to work, focusing on winning elections rather than rebelling. So, the Treaty of Versailles has already brought upon the complete suffering of the German people. Now is when the treaty really shows its dark aftermath. In the 1930s, the growing support for the Nazi Party was ever so evident in its votes. The people needed hope and were willing to go to radical measures for it. Adolf saw this as an opportunity to exploit them. He's finally seen his dreams come true. The president at the time, Paul von Hindenburg, who was a World War I hero, was just desperate for the country to rebuild. So he appointed Adolf Hitler as the new chancellor of the Weimar Republic. Unfortunately, he didn't see things the way Hitler did. And with that, Germany turned into what was essentially a dystopia. On April 7th, 1933, a policy was written, a law, if you will. It was known as the Law for the Restoration of Professional Civil Service. On Article 3, it states, civil servants who are not of Aryan descent are to be dismissed from their official duties. It had come full circle. The anger from the Treaty of Versailles has now led to something that nobody saw coming. A total violation of human rights. The measures, which were supposed to prevent another war from starting, did nothing of the sort but only banished the German people to a decade of suffering. When the international community, also known as the League of Nations at the time, purpose was to help countries in need. They did none of that.